Hello, this is Amy back at it again, and I am extremely excited because I am finally going to start creating content on my favorite show in the whole wide world in the history of time, which is Avatar the Last Airbender. I am a millennial, so I grew up watching the show, and I think it's a lot of what sparked me to start learning Chinese in high school. So I owe a debt of gratitude to this show, and I'm really excited. This video slash podcast episode is going to be about Chinese writing and character names in a song. Pardon me, I was about to say A Song by Fire in Avatar: The Last Airbender. Um, I This is the first time I'm recording this video with the intention and knowing that I'm going to turn it into a podcast episode. So those of you that are listening in podcast form, welcome. I am Amy Blackfire, and I'm so excited to have you here. I started out a blog, and then I started a YouTube channel, and now I guess I'm a podcaster. And I'm glad to have you along for the ride. So I just wanted, before I get into the topic, I like to get my plugs out of the way really quick. So let me tell you a little bit about what I have going on this channel slash podcast and what I have going on outside of that. If you search on YouTube for John Webster Film, I am there every Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern live, and John and I talk about movies. So if you are a cinephile, please join us. And I'm also over at the Unspun Yarn for something called Bleep the Patriarchy, where I do some feminist analysis with Nessie. She deserves your listen, your subscription, your like, your comment, all the things. So we have had the first episode of Bleep the Patriarchy, and our second episode is going to be February 10th at 2 p.m. Eastern. We're going to be talking about the binary with Lo the Lynx, my good friend. So what do I have coming up on this channel? If you're listening to this, probably means you are an Avatar: Last Airbender fan. So next week, I'm going to record with a full panel about the Air Nation. We're going to talk about Air Nation cultural influences, airbending characters. So I'm going to have on Steven Stark, Archmaester Buzzkill, who has a podcast called Through the Moon Door. Steven Stark has a YouTube channel called Here Be Dragons. And then I'm also going to have on my sister, Lady Triple, aka Christina. So we're going to have a good time talking about the Air Nation. If you are a Song of Ice and Fire / Game of Thrones fan, I am going to record with my friend Julie about Jon Snow. I am also going to record with my friend Bron Steries about yin and yang and black and white symbolism in Song of Ice and Fire. And I'm also going to have an essay about Hua Mulan, comparing her character to brave Dany Flint and Alaris / Sorella. And then finally, I'm a His Dark Materials fan by now, and I'm going to have Lo the Lynx on to talk about Mary Malone, her character. So speaking of Lo the Lynx, they, as you know, are my good. We have a couple's name called Omi or Mommy, however you want to say it. I am going to have them on my channel to do to do buddy banter. So my first 2 episodes are already out for your listening and watching pleasure. But on 5 p.m. Eastern on February 12th, we are going live on my channel. And Lo and I are going to talk about contemporary politics in fantasy, as well as the death of the author and can we separate the art and artists. We're going to have a really good time talking about that. So that is the end of my plugs, I promise. So if you are listening for the first time as a podcast, welcome. I'm so excited to have you. This particular episode is going to have a lot of visuals. So I do recommend that you watch the YouTube video, but if you want to listen as a podcast, that is totally up to you. And I am going to describe kind of the visuals as well as I can. So let's talk about Chinese characters in general. I have a bachelor's and a master's in Chinese, and I'm currently getting my PhD in East Asian Studies. I study Chinese literature specifically, so I am very aware and learned in Chinese characters. It is the love of my life, and it's what I've devoted over 10 years of my life to learning. So when I went back for like the 50th rewatch of Avatar: The Last Airbender, I realized how much Chinese writing was in there, and I wanted to make an episode about the role that Chinese writing plays in the show and in the character names. So let's go ahead and get started. So when we see Chinese writing in Avatar: The Last Airbender, it is in the form of signs, wanted posters, letters, and documents, as well as the characters' names are also put into Chinese characters. And we see it written in usually a traditional form rather than the simplified form. So Chinese characters on mainland China were simplified around the 1950s, but before then there were the quote unquote traditional characters. And before that, there were the Zhou dynasty characters, which I'm going to talk about here in a second. So it's also the way that the characters are read in the show are the traditional way, which means from top to bottom and from right to left. So this is how characters were written and printed until the 20th century when Western typeface was introduced. And that being said, there are some books today, especially those printed on the island of Taiwan and in Hong Kong, that use this traditional way of reading. And interestingly, in the show, when we see signs, though, they are read from left to right and horizontally. But in any letters, they are from up to down and left to right. So let's talk about the name of the show itself. In the opening sequence, we see this Avatar the Last Airbender, right? And above that, you see 4 characters. And this you read from left to right. So the way that we would read this, and I'm going to use the Mandarin pronunciation for all of these characters because I do not know Cantonese or any other Chinese dialect, but it would be Jiang Shi Shen Tong, which literally means a magical power that has descended to Earth. So the avatars in these characters is described as being a supernatural power that manifests on the earthly plane. So if we break down the Chinese characters, we have Jiang, the first one, which means to fall, Shi, which means earth, the world, and then Shen is a supernatural power or deity, and then Tong means to connect. So we can see that the avatar is a connection between the spiritual world and the human world, and is in fact an incarnation of divination, of divine power. And the avatar as a word in Hindu tradition is always used as the form of a god who has come to Earth to interact with our world. A really popular example is Krishna, who is an avatar of God Vishnu. So right away in the opening, the title itself is in Chinese characters. And the show designers obviously really had, I think, in my opinion, someone who knew what they were doing with Chinese characters. And we get a lot of really great translations. So let's go ahead and look at the opening sequence. You guys are used to hearing the water, earth, fire, air, right? Whenever that happens and you see someone bending and behind them there are characters. Now, these characters are written in the Zhou seal script. So seal script, also known as Zhou script, is from the Zhou dynasty, which is roughly from 1046 to 256 BCE, so a very long time ago. We have remnants of this type of writing through bronze vessels that are used to offer food to the ancestors, or oracle bones that were used for fortune telling and divination. So as we can see, let's start with the first one, which is water. On the left side, we have the older form to write water, which is shui. And then the right side has a character that I believe describes kind of a characteristic of the people of that nation. So in the case of the water tribe, we have Shui Shan, and so Shui meaning water, and then Shan, which means virtuous. So these are in the older form of a script, and it's very, very artistic and gorgeous looking. And when we get to talking about the names of the nations later in this episode, you will see the modern form of how to write water. So that is the water tribe. So let's take a look at earth. So earth is Tu Qiang. Tu means earth and Qiang means strong or strength. The people of the earth nation are very strong. Obviously, they are very stubborn and long-lasting. We see that when the Fire Nation is trying to take them over in the main series. And we also see that later in Legend of Korra as well. So let's take a look at fire, which is also another gorgeous calligraphy in the background. So we have Huo Lie. Huo means fire, and Lie means fierce or ferocity. So we see that the people of the Fire Nation are fierce and very also quite stubborn, like the Earth Kingdom. And of course, we get a lot of associations with nationalism and imperialism that I will definitely talk about in a future video / episode that I'm going to have on the nation. Let's talk about the last nation, which is air. So when we get these characters for air, on the left side we have qi, which means air, and then the right character means he, is pronounced he, so qi he. So obviously the left side means air, and the right side means peace or harmonious. So one thing to also note about air on the left side is that this is the way it is written today in simplified Chinese, and while the others are altered slightly. So for example, when we look at the Earth Kingdom on the left, so you see the left side character. Nowadays, the middle part where you see a filled in circle is written with just a line, which once again we'll see when I get to the names of the kingdoms later. So that is the opening sequence. We see these Chinese characters in the background that represents the nations. And they also represent an aspect about the nation. Not to mention they have those gorgeous bending sequences in front of these Chinese characters. So this right away with the opening sequence where you have the title of Avatar in Chinese, and you have all 4 of the elements being represented in Chinese as well, you automatically get the kind of East Asian and specifically Chinese associations and influences on Avatar the Last Airbender. And I do want to make one note, which is that the show uses the 4 elements, which would be more of an Indian way to look at the world, whereas the Chinese way would be the 5 phases, which would be fire, earth, water, metal, and wood. So this is slightly different. The 5 phases are different from the 4 elements. So we see here a mixing of Indian and Chinese influences, as well as Japanese influences on Avatar the Last Airbender. And I will definitely discuss this more in future videos. We're going to talk about this in my Air Nation video about the Tibetan, Hindu, and Buddhist influences on the Air Nation. And also just another example is in the Fire Nation, they have Agni Kais, and Agni is the god of fire in Hinduism. So we have a lot of different influences happening at once. So getting into the show itself, we have many different letters that are written to our characters. But there's one in particular that I wanted to highlight, and it's during a very touching moment in the show, which is in season 2, episode 15. We have the Tales of Ba Sing Se, which is where we get different characters' storylines going on. And one of them focuses on Iroh, and he is remembering his fallen son on his son's birthday, and his son's name is Luoten. So we get this letter from his son to General Iroh. So reading up and down from right to left, it says, General Iroh, I will see you again when victory is achieved. Your loyal son, Luoten. This is obviously very, very touching, and it has a lot of implications because, you know, Iroh realizes later that Fire Nation imperialism is not a good thing and that his son died for an unjust cause. But we do also see how Chinese writing in the show can be a moment of remembrance and a moment of reflection for the characters. So this letter from Luoten to Iroh is kind of an imprint or something that's left behind from his son. And of all the letters in the series, I think this one is the most touching and the most telling of Chinese characters, because there is an idea with calligraphy in Chinese culture that when one uses calligraphy, they are imprinting their self, their soul into their writing. We see this in the episode in season 3 where Sokka gets Pian Dao, his sword master, who tries to get him to write his name in calligraphy. And he says, you imprint your soul or yourself when you do calligraphy. This is a very common traditional way to look at calligraphy. We also see this in the excellent movie by Zhang Yimou, Hero, where there's a whole scene about calligraphy. So calligraphy, I think, has a very spiritual aspect to it in the show, just like it does in Chinese traditional culture. And that's what I really appreciate about this letter from Lu Tin to his father. So let's talk about another interesting thing, which is the use of the Zhou dynasty script in the actual series itself that is outside of the opening sequence. So we have this knife, which was used to cut Zuko and Iroh's hair and was originally given to Zuko as a child from General Iroh when he took it from a military, I believe it was a general from Ba Sing Se. So reading from up to down, there are 4 characters. And Zuko also briefly gives this knife to an Earth Nation boy until they find out he's Fire Nation and he gets the knife back. So the knife is translated in the show as "don't give up without a fight." And when we look at the Chinese characters, you would read it as "fei zhan bu qu," which literally means "without a fight, do not bend." So that's a pretty good translation of "don't give up without a fight." It's really common for swords and knives in China to contain 4-character phrases such as this. And this, once again, this phrase is written in that just gorgeous and just fascinatingly beautiful Zhou dynasty script that would have been used well before the Common Era. And we can see how the showrunners have done their research on how Chinese characters, particularly the Zhou script, are used in Chinese culture. So these are just a couple of episodes, a couple of examples of how we see these Chinese writing expressing itself in the show. So let's take a look at signs. So signage in Avatar the Last Airbender is also written in Chinese and is read from left to right. So here we have Ba Sing Se University. And you'll notice in the kind of bottom left, you have Ba Sing Se, the sign that says Ba Sing Se University, which would be Yonggucheng Daxue. And I'm going to talk about the name of Ba Sing Se later. But you can see that this is a way to kind of world build and show the, how the signage would be in a society like Avatar the Last Airbender, like those in Avatar the Last Airbender, which use Chinese characters. Interestingly, they, like I said earlier, they are read from left to right rather than right to left. There are some signs in mainland China and Taiwan that are read from right to left rather than left to right. But it seems that the Chinese language advisors decided to go from left to right. So another interesting part is the tea house sign that Iroh and Zuko work at until Iroh gets his own tea house in the upper ring of Ba Sing Se. So you can see the right 2 characters are Daguan, which means tea house. And this is obviously tea and tea houses specifically are a huge part of Chinese culture. It's a place to socialize, play games, and also have delicious tea. Iroh's love of tea is very much something that I relate to as someone who is a bit of a tea obsessive. Let's take a look at one more sign before we get to talking about character names. So this is also in the episode Tales of Ba Sing Se. And it says something along the lines of the 55th organization or Organization 55, Club 55, some kind of designation. And this is where Sokka finds beautiful girls reciting poetry. Specifically, they're reciting haiku, which is as you may already know, a Japanese poetic form, which is 5 syllables, 7 syllables, and 5 syllables again. So that's a fun part of that episode. And here we have, once again, some Chinese signage. And you will see this throughout the series, signs written in Chinese. But I think that Ba Sing Se is a particularly great place to find wonderful Chinese signs. So that's just kind of an overview of some writing in the series. But let's go ahead and take a look at character names. So the vast majority of the names in the series have Chinese names that are based on sound translation. Now, what this means is that you find Chinese characters that are the approximation of the sounds. For example, my name's Amy, and the Chinese character sound translation is I'm me, right? So you find 2 characters or more that essentially hold the same kind of pronunciation for the word you're looking for, or the name you're looking for. Something interesting to point out is we only get Toph's last name. This could be because she's from a prominent family, but we really don't get the last name of any other character. And when we see Toph present documents with her last name written and her name written in the letter, we see that her last name comes first. This is also the same for Chinese names. You have your last name and then your given name after that. So most names in Avatar the Last Airbender have 2 characters, which is like Chinese names. Most Chinese names are 1 character or 2 characters, except for a few exceptions such as Katara, which we will get to. So let's go ahead and start with some names. So first off, I'm going to talk about Toph and Aang. So Toph, we have her last name first, which is Beifang. So Beifang literally means a place in the north or of the north. And then we have Toph's name, which is a sound translation, which is Tuofu. And Tuo can mean to support, and Fu can mean many things. It can be a grammatical particle, which means this or that. I like to use the meaning of man because we have Zhang Fu in Chinese, which means husband. And Fu, you can also use it to mean the man of the house. So I like to translate Toph's name to supporting man. And we see that she certainly helps out Team Avatar and supports them a lot. So Beifang Tuofu would be how you would say Toph Beifang in Mandarin. Next we have Aang. So we did have, you will never hear me defend the live action movie that doesn't exist about Avatar the Last Airbender, but they did technically pronounce Aang's name right. It should be Aang, but Aang, it's fine. I'm not going to lose sleep over it. But here is his name in Chinese characters, which would be An and then Ang. So An means peace, and Ang means to rise. And I really like this translation that I've come up with, which is to raise peace or to bring peace, right? So the Avatar is, especially Ang, is supposed to bring peace to the world. And where I got these names, these specific characters, are from this episode of Tales of Ba Sing Se. So here you see, on the right side, it says, the story of Katara and Toph. So that's where I got Toph's name. In Chinese, Mandarin specifically would say, Katala yu tuofu de gu shi. And here we have Aang, which would be An Ang de gu shi, right? Aang's story. So this is where I got the characters for their name. So that's Aang and Toph. So next, let's talk about Iroh and his son Luten. So Iroh, so his first character, I, is the same I that I use for my name, Amy. So I can mean mugwort, but I like to use the more medieval Chinese meaning, which would mean to protect, because I feel like Iroh is a very, very protective character, especially when it comes to his nephew. And then we have the second character, which is Luo, which is often used in river names. And the thing about Iroh that I find interesting too is that he specifically learned how to redirect lightning from the Water Nation. He seems to have an affinity with the water benders. So I found it interesting that the second name in his character is, the second character in his name is very water meaning to it. And so this is where I got the name from, which is the title card from Tales of Ba Sing Se. You have Iroh the Gushi, which is the tale of Iroh, the story of Iroh. So he has a wonderful name. I really like it a lot. So let's take a look at Lu Ten, who in Mandarin Chinese it would be pronounced Lu Teng. So Lu means road, and Teng means to rush forth. And it can also specifically mean water, to rush, the washing forward of water. So it's very interesting that father and son both have names that are associated with water, and yet they are of the Fire Nation. So I find that very fascinating. And these are two really interesting names. And I also think that when I think about that with Lu Ten, something that Iroh regrets is that his son died before Iroh could really put him on the right path when it comes to denying Fire Nation colonialism and toward the path of peace and kind of what the White Lotus is supposed to represent. So that's Iroh and Lu Ten. So next pairing, I have Zuko and Sokka. So Zuko's name in Mandarin Chinese would be Sokka. Su is commonly used in sound translation, and it can mean perilla, which is basically a plant that's in the mint family. And ke means a branch of study. So not necessarily much going on there, but it's kind of fun. And next we have Sokka. Oh, and where I got this name, of course, is from Tales of Ba Sing Se, that episode where you get a lot of the names written. So you see on the right side, Zuko the Gushi, the tale of Zuko. So let's take a look at Sokka, which is Su-ka. And this is the same ka that will be used in Katara, which I will show in the next pairing. So Su can mean raw silk or vegetarian food, which is really funny when we're thinking about Sokka because he loves meat. I found that really interesting that was the Su for his name. And ka can mean to block or to stop something. And it's in modern Chinese, it's used as a loan word for cards, such as a credit card. So this is where I, of course, got this. And this is one of my favorite title cards from Tales of Ba Sing Se. You see Sokka there with his boomerang. And there is Sokka the Gushi, the tale of Sokka. So now let's take a look at Katara. And I went ahead and paired her with Momo because I thought that was fun. So Katara is one of the few characters that has 3 characters in her name, and it would be Katala. So there is no ra sound in Chinese. There is only ra and so they went with la to kind of mimic the r sound. So ka, like I said, is the same ka in Sokka's name, and means to block or stop something. Ta is a Buddhist pagoda, and that's a tower or a column that is built as a part of Buddhist worship, and it often marks where a relic has been buried. And La means to pool, and we'll look at that a little bit later when we get to the god of the ocean and the moon. And where I got Katara's name, once again, from that wonderful title slide, which says, the tale of Katara and Toph. So that's where you see Katala. So next is Momo, and it's the same character twice, and it's really cute. Momo would be the Mandarin Chinese for that. And mo means to imitate or a pattern, which I find really cute for an animal, especially a lemur, which is kind of a monkey-ish like animal where it can kind of mock humans. They don't necessarily mean mock as in make fun of. I mean to do the same motion or noise that someone else is doing. And there is the title slide from Tales of Ba Sing Se, where you have Momo the Gushi, the tale of Momo. And, everyone loves a good flying lemur. He's super cute. So that's it for the main cast. So let's look at some side characters. One of my absolute favorite is Pian Dao, which is Sokka's sword master. And you can see him here with the sword. He's the one who had helped Sokka to forge his space sword. and to teach him the ways of the sword. Now, Piandao is wonderful because as a word, Piandao is a type of sword that was popular during Ming Dynasty China, which was about 1368 to 1644. So the sword master actually has a name of a Chinese sword, and that's why it's my favorite name in the series. It's one of the most creative, it's one of the most culturally significant, and I really appreciate that. But speaking of culturally significant, let's talk about Princess Yue. So her name is actually Moon. Yue means moon. So she later becomes the moon goddess. And if you notice, like in this picture I put up, if you're watching on YouTube, she becomes the goddess of the moon. And her character design is obviously modeled after Chang'e, who is the moon goddess in Chinese mythology. And Chang'e lives on the moon with a jade rabbit. And she was originally, the tale of Chang'e is that she had a husband named Hou-Yi who was a great archer. And there were 10 suns in the sky. And it was too hot. Crops were dying. The people couldn't survive. So Hou-Yi, he shot down 9 of the suns so that people could live. And as his reward, he was given an elixir that would bring immortality. And he was away and Chang'e was at home, and there are 2 versions of the story. One version is that she took the elixir for herself. I don't really like that story. I like the other story, which is that there were thieves that came to the house when Hou-Yi was away trying to steal the elixir, and Chang'e drank it herself in order to make sure that the thieves did not get it. And in doing so, she began to float up to the moon and became the moon goddess. So this is who Princess Yue is modeled after. And we see in Avatar the Last Airbender, she literally becomes the moon goddess. And this is just a gorgeous tribute to Chinese mythology. And it's really well done. She's a very interesting character. We don't get that much of her, but what we do is just a wonderful adaptation of the Chinese myth of the moon goddess Chang'e. So she's literally named Moon, Yue, or Yue in the show pronunciation. So let's talk a little bit about some spirits, since I just mentioned Princess Yue. Hei Bai, he is super cute. He is the spirit of black and white. Hei means black and Bai means white. It's one of the most straightforward of all of them. When Aang meets Hei Bai, the spirit of black and white, he is, of course, this kind of scary, demonic kind of creature with the sonic scream. But then when he becomes Aang's friend and when he is comforted about his forest, he becomes a cute panda, which are have black and white colors. So that is Hei Bai, the spirit of black and white. And another kind of spirit is a dual spirit, which is the spirit of the moon and the ocean. And in the show, they are called Tui and La. The correct pronunciation would be Tui and La, which means to push and pull. And we see them in the show, as you can see on the screen if you're watching on YouTube, as fish, where one is white with a black dot on its head and one is black with a white dot on its head. And then eventually they become, you've seen it before, the yin and yang symbol, which in the West is usually called yin and yang. So they represent balance. There is Tui and La, push and pull. These are balancing aspects, balancing dualism. And we have the yin and yang symbolism, which is also about balance. So that is the moon and the ocean spirit, Tui and La. So let's take a look at one last interesting pairing, which is Ran and Shao. And these are the dragons that Zuko and Aang go to meet when they, in season 3, episode 13, they meet, called the Firebending Masters. So they want to go, Zuko and Aang want to go learn the origins of firebending. and they find this civilization called the Sun Warriors, and they have to prove themselves to the firebending masters. And they turn out to be 2 dragons, which are named Ren and Shao. And as you can see, once again, if you're watching on YouTube, one is blue and one is red. And they eventually do the dragon dance and prove themselves to these firebending masters. But what's interesting about them is their names. Ren means to ignite, and Shao means to burn. So they both have this fire imagery in their name. And, you know, that is just another interesting kind of detail of the show. It's obvious that the showrunners really were interested in the names having meaning, so that they were culturally significant and that they were also significant in world. So next, I'm going to talk about place names. And I'm mostly going to talk about Ba Sing Se and the 4 nations to top off this video/episode. So we learn in the series that Ba Sing Se is the impenetrable city. That's how it's described to us. And we find from signs such as Ba Sing Se University, which I showed earlier, that the Chinese name for Ba Sing Se is Yonggucheng. Yong means forever, Gu means strong or solid, and then Cheng means city. So it's literally forever strong city or forever solid city. So, you know, impenetrable city, it's a pretty good translation. But that's basically the characters for Ba Sing Se. And once again, the Mandarin for that would be Yonggucheng. So what's interesting about the nation names, and now you can see on the left, we have the water nation. That's the symbol for water. So they basically put the symbol for water in front of guo, which means, today it means nation, but it used to mean kingdom. Country, so it used to mean kingdom, now it means nation or country. So anytime you see any of the nations written, it's essentially the elements in front of guo. So we have water nation, the shui guo, literally water country or water kingdom. Next, we have the earth kingdom / earth nation, which is tu guo. So once again, using that tu from the opening sequence, which means earth, of course. Specifically, earth meaning dirt, not earth meaning the world. That's an important distinction in Chinese. And then fire nation, huo guo, which means, of course, there's in front of nation. So very direct translations. And one thing that's interesting too is that if you said it a different way, which is huo guo, that means hot pot. So anyone that's a fan of hot pot, which is essentially Chinese fondue, but instead of cheese, it's kind of a soup that you dip in vegetables or meat and you cook it, and it's delicious. So I'm making myself hungry thinking about it. So that's the fire nation. And then last, of course, we have the air nation, Guo. And if you're paying attention in the beginning on YouTube, you'll notice that the chi is a little bit different. There is something in the bottom left of the character, which is mi, which means rice. And that is, if you take that out, that would be the simplified or even the older version of the character. But this is the modern traditional version of the character. So qi guo, once again, qi is air, and then guo is nation. Qi can also mean gas. So it's essentially a kind of vapor meaning to it. So that is all I have. That's a very quick rundown of the role that writing, specifically Chinese writing, plays in character names, place names, and written correspondence in the show. I really appreciated bringing my love of Chinese to you. If you are listening on podcasts, please rate, and I don't know the version of subscribe on podcast. Yeah, subscribe on the podcast. Give me 5 stars. And if you are watching on YouTube, on the bottom right-hand side, you will see a little avatar of me. And please, Avatar, please click that and you will subscribe to my channel and like and share this with your friends. I really love bringing interesting little tidbits about Chinese to you. And really, Avatar the Last Airbender is so special to my heart. And I look forward to bringing you more content about this show. Like I said, I have an upcoming video / episode on the Air Nation with 3 people. I'm going to have a full panel. And I'm going to do, of course, the Earth, Water, and Fire Nation as well. And then I'm going to have some different topics about the show. So if you are an Avatar Last Airbender fan, please subscribe to me. If you're a Song of Ice and Fire, His Dark Materials fan, I'm your girl. I'm also going to start doing Poppy War and The Witcher. So I've got a lot of geeky stuff going on my channel / podcast. And once again, if you're listening in podcast form, thank you so much. I am so happy to have you. And I look forward to your future support. If you follow me on Twitter, you will be able to interact with me. I do polls. I do lots and lots of polls. I want to know your opinion on all sorts of things. So please follow the link below in the video and in the podcast description of this episode to follow me on Twitter. I really appreciate it. And I love your feedback and learning about your thoughts. So once again, thank you very much. And I will see you next time.